Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to talk about some books that I've read in the month of August. So I have quite a few books to talk about today, and these go back all the way to the beginning of August. Books that I've finished since then and I haven't talked about yet on the channel, so let's just get to it. So the first book that I finished in the month was an audiobook of, called The Deep by Rivers Solomon. Rivers Solomon is an American writer, goes with the pronouns they, them, identifies with the LGBTQ plus community, and this is a speculative fiction book that they've written, and the premise of the book is really fascinating. So the premise is, if the enslaved Africans who were thrown overboard from the ships that were bringing them to the American colonies, if those people had survived and sort of transformed and created a community under the sea as sort of these people, mermaids and mermen sort of creatures, what would that be like? And the book is based on a hip-hop song. And like I said, I listened to this on audiobook, and it's read by the singer of the hip-hop song. So the audiobook is very excellently done. I would highly recommend the audiobook. And I think that the premise of the story is really fascinating. The story is very much along the lines of The Giver, where we're following one main character who is the historian of this group of folks living under the water. And her job is to hold all of the memories of her people. And then once a year, she shares those memories with everybody else in the community. But they all forget it the rest of the year. And she is forced to hold the trauma for everyone, basically. All the terrible things that have happened to these people, she holds that all for everyone. And it's, what is that like if you have to be the memory keeper for an entire group of people? And so that premise is really, really interesting and fascinating. And the book was okay, but for me, where it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. It was a little repetitive in places, and even though it's a short book, the audiobook actually felt long to me. So while I think there are some things about it that I very much enjoyed, there were some parts of it that I just found kind of boring, which is not what you want in your speculative fiction. So kind of a mixed bag for me on The Deep. The next book I read was my first book for Women in Translation Month, and I buddy read this book with Britta Bowler. It's Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor and translated by Sophie Hughes. Melchor is a Mexican author, and this book takes place in a small village in Mexico. And it's very, very dark. So the first couple of chapters were quite good. We are learning about this character, this woman who is turned into sort of the witch of the village persona, and then her daughter is also basically inherits the title of witch. And at the end of the second chapter, I mean, this is not a spoiler, it's on the, this from the back blurb, she gets killed. The witch gets killed. And then the rest of the book is the entire village basically narrating the backstory of how this all came to be, and who we're finding out as the story goes on, who killed the witch and why. So that premise also was very good. And like I said, the first couple of chapters where we were learning about the witch were very, very interesting. But this book just did not work for me. I mean, it devolved super rapidly into a complete hot mess of a book for me. It is filled with the most horrible, gratuitous violence and sexual depravity. I felt like every possible horrible way that human beings treat each other is thrown into this book. And I didn't see what the purpose of that was. I really felt it was, I don't know why it was put in there. For me, it didn't help move the story along. It didn't help with character development because the characters were not nuanced in any way. Like, for example, all of the women in this book were either whores or saints. Like, they either were just sex maniacs that wanted to have sex with everyone, or they were like religious fanatics. No in-betweens at all. And the men were completely governed by their base instincts. Like there was no kindness and no anything to these men other than just beasts. They were just like written as to be beasts, basically. So no, I didn't like it. And also, I'm just going to throw it out there. If you are bothered at all by profane language, this book is not for you, because the language in this book even bothered me, and I am not bothered by swear words at all, as many of you know. But this book, it was just like, it was difficult to read. So yeah, this book was not for me. I will say, if you like Quentin Tarantino movies, you might like this book. It read very much like a Quentin Tarantino movie to me. And I don't like Quentin Tarantino movies. So too bad to start my Women in Translation month with that book. I then read a picture book. So that was a nice change of pace. And this book is delightful. I mean, a lot of people have talked about this picture book as being, you know, an excellent one. And it is. This is Soulway by Lupita Nyong'o. And it's illustrated by Vashiti Harrison, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, look at the illustrations in this book. I mean, I can't even. This little girl on the cover here, she's darker skinned than her family and all of her friends at school, and it really bothers her, and she gets treated differently because of the darkness of her skin, and she doesn't understand why she can't be more light-skinned like her mom and her sister. And so this is her journey to learn to love herself and the color of her skin, and it is absolutely beautiful. I actually bought this as a gift for a child in my life, but I read it because I've been wanting to read it myself, and I can tell you that I will be purchasing this as a gift for all of the young children in my life this year, because I think this is just an absolutely delightful picture book, and I would highly, highly recommend it. Then I finished my second book for Women in Translation Month, and that was a book I've talked about in my recent videos. This is The Unwomanly Face of War, An Oral History of Women in World War II by Svetlana Alexievich. This is translated by Richard Pivar and Larissa Volkonsky. Sorry, I'm quite sure that was a terrible pronunciation, as nobody is surprised at all. This book was so good. This just cements the fact that I really love Svetlana Alexievich. She interviews hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people and takes herself completely out of the narrative. So the narrative is just like little snippets of conversation from the people that Alexievich has spoken with about and in this case, about their experiences in the war. So this is all women who fought during World War II for the Red Army. So these women are from Russia and Belarus and Ukraine and Siberia, and just all, you know, at one point would have made up the Soviet Union, but of course are now in their own, broken up into smaller countries. And I don't know all of them. I can't remember off the top of my head, but like I said, it was not just Russia. It was a lot of other countries that all made up the Red Army at the time for World War II. So it's kind of difficult to talk about the geography because the geography has changed quite a bit, even from when this book was originally, when she started collecting the information for this book. So this book was originally published in 1985 in Russian, and then this translation is more recent, 2017. So this is just fascinating. What the women in Russia just signing up, you know, the minute that war was declared. These young women, a lot of them in their teens and not even out of school. I mean, we're talking 16, 17, 18-year-old young women just wanting to go to the front to fight beside the men and to help protect the motherland. Like, this was the feeling at the time, you know, that you had to do everything. You had to sacrifice everything for the motherland. And it's just fascinating. And it's interesting to me that there are very few examples in the book where the woman who was being interviewed was critical of the other men that they were fighting with. Most of the time it was just like, you know, the men treated us good, you know, they were glad to have us there, or if not glad to have us there, were accepting. And then once they were there, you know, would try to protect them or get them extra food if there was any extra food to be had, or to help them, you know, get something to cover their feet or whatever. Because these people, you know, the Russian army just had nothing. Like, they had no food, they had no clothing, they had no shelter. They just were like cold, hungry. Sometimes they would send them to the front without any guns, and they would have to wait for one of their comrades to be killed and take their comrade's gun in order to have a gun to protect themselves with. I mean, they just sent bodies to the front line in this war. And these women didn't just act as nurses or medical assistants or cooks or laundry people. I mean, those roles definitely were filled by women, but they also were snipers. They were engineers, doing, you know, building bridges and things like that. They were either setting mines or dismantling mines. There were even a few pilots in here. There was mechanics. So women filled every role. There were bombardiers. There were ammunition experts. Just every role that you can imagine in that kind of war. I mean, which was definitely a much more physical, hand-to-hand type of a war than we would experience today, were filled by women. And it was just amazing. And you can see, I've tabbed just a few things, and they're just, I mean, you could tab the whole book. It was so good. You know, this person being interviewed was talking about the difference between World War I and World War II and what we remember about that. And it says, for the French, World War I caused a greater shock than World War II. We remember it. There are graves and monuments everywhere, but we know little about you, the you being the women that fought in World War II. Today, many people, especially the young, think it was only America that defeated Hitler. Little is known about the price Soviet people paid for the victory. 20 million human lives in 4 years, and about your sufferings, immeasurable. I mean, that's just it. Especially for me as an American, when I learn about World War II, there's so much about how the World War II impacted other countries that I know about, because the perspective is always the American perspective. And because we came into the war later and were there, you know, when the war ended, you know, and of course all the bombs and all that kind of stuff, a lot of focus is placed on the American impact on the war. But think about what the people of Russia and the other Soviet countries sacrificed. 20 million people. Unbelievable. So I could go on and on about this book, but I'll just stop there and encourage you all, if you have not yet picked up any Svetlana Alexievich, to definitely do so. She is amazing. Really, really love her stuff. And I think I will end there for the books that I've talked about today. I'm running on 13 minutes already, and then I will film another one of these videos in another week or so and wrap up the rest of the books that I've read and not discussed in August. I hope you're all doing well and finding some good books to read, and I will talk to you later.